As we have already learned, the outer universe in which beings live changes with each split second, and nothing remains unchanged and permanent, including the Dharma hall we use for teachings. Recently, I listed how many times the teaching venue has changed since the great Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche began teaching until now, as well as how many times the venue where I give teachings to the Han Chinese Fourfold Assemblies has changed over the past decade. While lay people who were not at Larungar were studying the way of the Bodhisattva, they have also changed the venue many times. All these changes are reflections of impermanence. Not to mention elsewhere, just look at where you have lived, the house you grew up in, the environment of your previous schools, and the place you live in now. What will these places become in the future? Therefore, if you examine many perspectives, you will come to understand that the outer environment is impermanent. In fact, school education also covers the concept of impermanence. That is, everything is always in motion, and nothing is absolutely static. Although worldly knowledge discusses impermanence, it doesn't delve into the subject as systematically and deeply as the Dharma does, let alone provide specific guidance for us to integrate it into our minds and put it into practice, as the words of my perfect teacher does. Many people like to say everything is impermanent, but have they really acted on that understanding? Felt the urge to practice Dharma and cut off attachment to permanence for worldly concerns? Only when we have deepened our practice on impermanence will we find the motivation to practice Dharma. We'll use impermanence day and night to encourage and supervise our Dharma practice. Therefore, we must put enough effort into the practice of impermanence. It's easy for everyone to feel the constant change of everything once in a while. For example, after listening to a teaching, reading a good book, or encountering the death of a loved one, we may suddenly realize how impermanent everything is and conclude that we'd better practice diligently. However, it's not easy for many people to keep the principle of impermanence in mind at all times. Therefore, we should study, contemplate, and read the words of my perfect teacher often. Otherwise, ordinary people can easily succumb to external temptations. The temporary state of recognizing impermanence is like sunshine in the clouds, which will soon be obscured again by the dark clouds of obstacles. That's why past eminent masters have said that the preliminary practices are also the main practices, and they are even more important than the main practices. A practitioner I know placed great importance on great perfection and Chan practice, but showed little interest in the impermanence of life and the defects of samsara. Many years have passed, and I have heard her practice hasn't progressed well. I believe she used to attain certain states, but in order for such states to take root in her mind, she must practice ngondro. During these preliminary practices, our focus should be on both quality and quantity. We must genuinely connect with and align our minds with each meditative guidance and transform our minds accordingly. This is the state we should aim to reach. For example, when we pray to the Guru, it's better to truly cultivate Guru devotion so that we may have tears running down our cheeks and hair standing on end, or at least generate genuine respect for the Guru. When meditating on impermanence, we shouldn't just recite the guidance text and feel indifferent. Instead, we should strive for a personal experience, a deeper inner resonance, like a vibration emanating from the depths of our being. Therefore, we shouldn't just focus on superficial formality when practicing Dharma. While formality can be considered a component of a virtuous act, it does not hold substantial significance. No matter which practices you are engaged in, you should generate a feeling deep down in your mind. It's only when you taste the practice's flavor that you won't be easily swayed throughout your practice. Otherwise, When someone praises the practice of impermanence, you may start the practice, but a few days later, when someone else belittles the practice of impermanence and advocates another practice, you might immediately echo what they say and change your practice. This is not good. If you have tasted the flavor of the practice, you will generate conviction, which will protect you from being influenced or swayed by external factors. The impermanence of beings living in the universe. From the summit of the highest heavens to the deepest hells, not a single being can escape death. There are countless beings in the 6 realms. The number of all beings is much more than the 6.5 billion humans on Earth. Nevertheless, none of the beings can escape death, except the very few eminent masters who have attained the level of Vidyadhara with power over life, or who have directly entered the pure realm without abandoning their physical bodies. As the letter of consolation says, have you ever on earth or in the heavens seen any living being born who will not die, or heard that such a thing had happened, or even doubted that it could? Where there is life, there is inevitably death. When the Japanese Zen Buddhist monk Ikkyu broke his master's favorite cup, he did not dare to tell his master directly. Instead, he waited until the master returned and asked, "What thing, once born, will not die?" The master replied, "Everything born is bound to die. There is nothing that never dies." Ikkyu then revealed the pieces of the broken cup he had hidden behind him and said, "Then your cup is dead." Thus, the master did not scold him. Nobody has ever seen anyone or heard of anyone in any realm, even in the worlds of the gods, who was born but never died. In fact, there is absolutely no doubt about whether death will eventually come or not. The collection of impermanence says, "Neither in the space, nor in the sea, nor in the mountains and forests, there is no such a place where the Lord of Death won't reach." Therefore, wherever it may be it in space, the sea, or the forests in the mountains, there is no place the Lord of Death won't reach. There is nowhere you can hide to escape death. If there were indeed a deathless place, given the great compassion of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, they would have placed countless sentient beings there. However, this is simply impossible. Here is a story I've told you before. 2 monks specializing in Buddhist logic went on a trip to receive teachings. One night, they couldn't find accommodation, so they asked an old lady if they could stay at her house overnight. Besides her daughter, the old lady had no one else living with her. The old lady asked, "Have you studied Buddhist logic? I find monks who have studied this to be very troublesome. If so, please do not stay at my house. You surely will give me a difficult time." Hearing this, the monks pleaded, "We do study Buddhist logic, but we guarantee not to give you any trouble. We really cannot find anywhere else to stay tonight. Please help us and let us stay here overnight." Seeing their sincerity, the old lady agreed, albeit a bit reluctantly. After supper, the old lady found a louse on her body, so she told her daughter, "Please quickly take it away to a place where it won't die," meaning somewhere safe. One monk heard her and immediately said, "Grandma, if there is indeed a place where death never arrives, can you also put us too there?" The old lady was quite annoyed and complained, "You monks of Buddhist logic always talk like this. Didn't you just promise me you wouldn't give me a hard time? Had I known this would happen, I wouldn't have let you stay in my house." Indeed, there is no place where death never arrives. If there were, people with money, power, and resources would manage to go there at all costs. It is a certainty that everyone dies and no one is exempt from death. Ordinary people typically understand the certainty of death, but unlike good practitioners, they don't reflect on the uncertainty of where and when they'll die. Therefore, the primary reason for our laziness is that we don't practice impermanence well, especially since we are born in Jambudvipa, where lifespans are uncertain, and we live in the degenerate age. Death will come swiftly upon us. In reality, from the very day of our birth, we have been moving step by step toward death. A person's lifespan never increases, only decreases, and the demon of death approaches us relentlessly, like the shadow of the setting sun, drawing ever closer with each passing moment. In the first age of this kalpa, humans' lifespans could extend to 60,000 or 80,000 years, but now, at the end of this small kalpa, our lifespan is extremely short. Our lifespan resembles a leaky pool, with the water in which is only decreasing instead of increasing. Death never stops approaching us. Many people are very happy on their birthdays when others sing the happy birthday song to them. In fact, this is unwise. It's similar to when a butcher approaches a yak to be slaughtered. If someone is singing happy birthday to the poor animal, do you think the yak will be happy? The time and place of death are always uncertain. No one can be sure whether they will still be alive tomorrow, tonight, or even in the very next breath. No matter how intelligent and well-versed you are, you dare not assert, "I certainly won't die now." At most, you may guess, with much uncertainty, "Maybe I won't die now." There is no way for you to present solid evidence and conclude with irrefutable reasoning, "I surely won't die now because of so and so." Therefore, the original vows of Ksiti Garbha Bodhisattva Sutra says, "The great ghost of impermanence arrives at an unscheduled time. Death never sets an appointment with anyone. It often comes unexpectedly and takes our lives. Sometimes when we witness a person dying, it can strike us profoundly." A few days ago, when I was in the town of Upper Lokama, someone asked me to practice phowa for a deceased lady. When I arrived at her place, she was still breathing, and her children and other family members were crying around her. Although she couldn't move anymore, it seemed she knew what was happening. When she heard me reciting, she tried to put her palms together. This lady was fairly wealthy, but after working so hard all her life, she couldn't take anything with her at the moment of death. Whether she liked it or not, this was the reality. However, the way she left this world was not bad. She had been very ill for 1 or 2 months and knew recovery was impossible, so she had made some preparations for her death. But many people might not be this fortunate. As the way of the Bodhisattva says, "This I have not done, and this I'm only starting, and this I'm only halfway through. Then is the sudden coming of the Lord of Death, and oh, the thought, alas, I'm finished." The Lord of Death comes out of the blue, and we haven't prepared at all. Therefore, life is indeed very fragile. However, the biggest problem is that people do not keep the principle of impermanence in mind. They naively believe that death will not arrive too soon. With such a mentality, one's practice is bound to fail. As it says in the collection of deliberate sayings, "Who knows if death will come tomorrow? Today, one must strive diligently." The great army of the Lord of Death, are they your kin? We don't know whether we'll die tomorrow, so as long as we can still breathe and have a chance for practice, we must engage in diligent Dharma practice. Otherwise, do you think you're a beloved one of the Lord of Death, such that this close relationship will prevent you from falling into a lower realm and instead allow you to directly enter the blissful land? If you don't think this way, why not start practicing diligently right now? In our daily lives, we should always reflect on, will I die or not? For example, when you go to the bathroom, you should think, will I die here? When you go to fetch water, you should think, will I die on the way? When you go to bed at night, you should think, will I wake up alive tomorrow? Life is truly between this breath and the next. As recorded in the Sutra of 42 Chapters, the Buddha asked his disciples, "How long is life?" Some answered a few days, while others said between meals. Hearing their responses, the Buddha shook his head in disagreement. Then one disciple said, "It's between this breath and the next." The Buddha agreed and nodded. Human life is extremely fragile. Apart from natural disasters, a construction company can guarantee our house will remain intact for decades. However, no one can sign a contract with us, promising that we will remain alive for decades. In Letter to a Friend, Nagarjuna says, "Life is fragile and impermanent, like a water bubble blown by the wind. In deep sleep, breathing in and out, how miraculous to wake up in the morning. People sleep peacefully, breathing in and out steadily. Yet there is no certainty that death will not come during this time. To wake up alive after a night's sleep is so extraordinary." Non-practitioners may wonder why it is remarkable that one wakes up still alive, saying, "I am in good shape and I am not sick. How could I die while sleeping?" But have you ever considered that you could die suddenly if an earthquake strikes and your house collapses at night? Not long ago, a practitioner was in retreat in her cabin, which for some reason suddenly caught fire. By the time people noticed the fire, she had already died inside. During the morning of that day, she certainly wouldn't have thought, "Today is my last day." Otherwise, she could have made some preparations. Once, a person who was skeptical yet intrigued by Buddhism told me, "Wouldn't it be great if everyone knew how long they were going to live so they could make some preparations? As it is, I don't know when I am going to die. Sometimes this terrifies me." He wished to live like the beings of Uttarakuru who have a fixed lifespan. But in my view, whether one has a fixed lifespan or not doesn't matter that much. Everyone is going to die one day. Of the several hundred Dharma students sitting here today, some of you may have died by this time next year. But since we don't have clairvoyance, we don't know whether this includes you or me. Some individuals only focus on the present and don't care about what will happen at the moment of death and after. Even worse, when death is mentioned, they immediately dodge the subject and lack the courage to face it. In fact, now is not the time to avoid death. Instead, we must confront it and prepare for it with Dharma practice as soon as possible. A practitioner who has practiced impermanence well can easily accept anything, including death, when it occurs to themselves or others. As we often see, good practitioners don't cry in agony when losing a loved one, and they may even smile at the moment of their own death, because they have long understood that life is as uncertain and fragile as a candle in the wind. In comparison, many worldly people feel devastated when faced with their own death or the death of a loved one. Such a reaction is primarily due to their lack of practice. Every one of us encounters many causes of death in life. As stated in Nagarjuna's precious garland, the causes of death are so many, those of staying alive are so few, which too can become causes of death. Therefore, we should always perform the practices. There are so many causes of death, and sometimes even essential factors for staying alive, such as food and medicine, can lead to death. The fact that we fall asleep at night and wake up still alive is indeed a wondrous thing. Regarding the verse, "In deep sleep, breathing in and out, how miraculous to wake up in the morning." One master says it means, "To attain great realization between this breath and the next is truly wondrous." However, this explanation is not accurate. Given the content preceding and following this verse, the text discusses impermanence, so it doesn't make sense for the author to suddenly introduce the concept of great realization. If that were the case, then it could indeed be considered a wondrous thing. Therefore, when you teach others, you should have received the transmission and fully understand everything in the text. Otherwise, you risk creating misunderstandings. Although we all know that one day we will die, we do not really allow our attitudes toward life to be affected by the uncertainty of death. The great Jigme Phuntsog Rinpoche said it's crucial that we generate conviction that the time of death is uncertain. Those performing the practice of impermanence, especially practitioners in the Nyingma and Kagyu lineages, place great importance on this specific meditation. If one generates conviction about this, they will surely practice diligently and won't become lazy day after day. As Master Lian Qi, the 8th patriarch of the Chinese Pure Land tradition, said in his Essays by the Bamboo Window, if a worldly person has a hobby, they will spend all their time on it and devote themselves to it day and night. Master Lian Qi described worldly people's indulgence in antiques, drinking, poetry, chess, and more, and added that although there are hardly any monastics addicted to drinking, some monastics cannot avoid becoming attached to other hobbies. What a great pity that one squanders precious time on such things. Nowadays, many practitioners who haven't practiced impermanence well are driven by fabricated thoughts and get themselves busy with many activities. However, whether those activities are of any value for their next lifetime is truly hard to determine. If we have conviction about impermanence, we may find ourselves constantly contemplating the possibility of death occurring at any moment. If we lack this conviction, we may end up constantly planning for things decades ahead. What am I going to do for a living 50 years from now? How will I live my life then? We constantly cling to the notion of a permanent livelihood, as if we were going to live forever. As such, we squander our precious human lives by fretting over our own gains and losses. The words of my perfect teacher is extraordinary. I hope you'll read the content we cover each day over and over again and truly grasp its meaning. By doing so, a sense of aversion towards samsara will be compelled to arise in your mind, and you will come to understand that everything is impermanent. As a result, you will no longer cling tightly to things like family, relationships, fame, and wealth. A Buddhist once told me, "What you taught us is absolutely true. Just like the ants, who can lose all the food they collect due to a hailstorm, we may also lose the wealth we have accumulated throughout our lifetime because of a financial crisis. When everything is gone, we can only look at the boundless blue sky." Those who practice impermanence well will think of the corresponding teachings when encountering adversity, whereas those who don't practice well will grumble and even think, "How unlucky I am. What should I do? Should I consider jumping off a building or overdosing on sleeping pills?" Without understanding the impermanent nature of everything, a person may feel that life is unfair when faced with sudden adversity. In fact, this is not the case. Everything that is happening to us is the result of past actions we have committed. This is the undeniable law of cause and effect. We stay completely immersed in the exhausting pursuit of well-being, happiness, and fame, until suddenly, we are confronted by the Lord of Death, holding his black rope, clenching his teeth, and baring his fangs. At the time of death, even if you are the head of government surrounded and protected by a brave army, you still can't escape the clutches of death. However powerful you are, even if you are the president of a country and loved by all the citizens, when death comes, there is nothing you can do. So, when death arrives, nothing can help us. No valiant army, no ruler's decrees, no abundant wealth, no scholar's eloquence, no beauty's charms, no swift galloping steeds, none of it is of any use. If money could buy deathlessness, billionaires would have traded all their wealth for it. I've seen rich men request a heart or liver transplant at a hospital. They showed no concern about the cost. As long as they could extend their lives by a few years, they were willing to spend all their money. Once in a Shanghai hospital, I came across a sad story about a wealthy entrepreneur. Judging by his attire, it was evident that he was financially well off. He repeatedly pleaded with his doctor, saying, "As long as I can live, even if there's only a glimmer of hope, you can try whatever you think might help. The cost is not an issue at all." But there was really nothing the doctor could do, so he told the entrepreneur, "We'll see. You should go back and rest first." If a patient is told, "You should go back and rest first," this may imply bad news. In such a situation, the patient may consider arranging for the service of phowa, the transference of consciousness at the time of death, from a monastery. That patient may not necessarily feel the need to cry out for help from doctors and nurses. Practitioners with a belief in impermanence react to death very differently from ordinary people. As I told you before, I once took a senior practitioner to see a doctor at Barkham Hospital, and he was diagnosed with liver cancer. Although the doctor didn't tell him the diagnosis, he could tell the severity of his illness from the doctor's expression. Then the practitioner told me, "Let's not waste time here. I'd like to return to the monastery. You don't need to feel sad for me. There is nothing to be miserable about." Since he had requested to go back, I informed him of his diagnosis. Upon hearing it, his facial expression didn't change at all, and he simply said, "There is certainly nothing they can do. It's fine, let's go back." This is how a true practitioner reacts to death. When death arrives, we might seal ourselves inside an impenetrable iron chest, guarded by hundreds of thousands of brave warriors armed with sharp weapons, with the tips of their arrows and spears pointed outward in defense. It still cannot provide the slightest protection or shield against fate. Most worldly people don't want to die, whereas some practitioners desire the opposite. In particular, some seniors who practice the recitation of Amitabha would be willing to leave this world at any time once they feel confident in their practice. In fact, some even wish to die sooner so they can meet the Buddha Amitabha. As long as they remain in the physical body, they won't be able to see Amitabha. Such practitioners are confident about having a good death and a favorable next life. In contrast, worldly people find it hard to accept death. They believe that living in the human realm is the happiest experience, making them very reluctant to die. Moreover, they cannot fathom the bliss a practitioner may experience after their death. Once the Lord of Death places his black rope around our neck, our face begins to pale. Our eyes glaze over with tears, our body stiffens, and we are dragged onto the path of the next life. At that moment, death cannot be fought off by any warrior, ordered away by the powerful, or paid off by the rich. Death leaves nowhere to run to, no place to hide, no refuge, no defender or guide. Not even the boundless compassion of the noble ones can provide shelter. And even if the medicine Buddha himself were to descend, he could not prolong a life that has reached its end. A dying person cannot escape death, even if he hides in every corner of the world. If one could be exempted from death in America or Canada, then all the wealthy would have already immigrated there. However, even Americans and Canadians are afraid of death. When the great Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche visited America, he noticed that Americans fear death as much as Asians do, perhaps even more. Once, an AIDS patient told us that he would be willing to spend more money on medicines that could prolong his life, and that he had been searching for treatment everywhere in the world. However, when the causes and conditions for living have exhausted, nobody, including this patient, will escape death. People who are new to Buddhism often ask, why does a person still die after receiving blessings from a tulku or from the guru? This question is quite naive. The treasury of Abhidharma lists 4 kinds of beings, including those whose merit is exhausted, but whose lifespan is not. and those whose lifespan is exhausted, but whose merit is not. If your life has run out, even if the medicine Buddha appears, he won't be able to delay your death. However, if your merit has run out but your life hasn't, performing recitations or other pujas can be of help. Therefore, the answer to the question is, it depends. We shouldn't hastily jump to a careless conclusion. So, we must never be lazy or procrastinate again and again. Instead, we should sincerely practice the supreme and authentic Dharma that will truly benefit us at the moment of death. The biggest obstacle to our practice is our laziness. If you are very lazy, no matter how long you live, your practice won't progress. Therefore, diligence is very important. Even if you practice diligently just for one day, the benefit you can receive is incredible. The Dhammapada says, instead of living up to 100 years old and being immoral and vicious, you should rather live for only one day being diligent and virtuous. Therefore, we should never slack off. Otherwise, given our short lifespan and the many distractions on the path, when can we succeed in our Dharma practice? The treasured instructions of Chan Temple says, the teachings and realization of noble beings cannot be assimilated within a day. Therefore, realization cannot be accomplished in just 1 or 2 days. It demands diligent practice every single day of the year, for many years. Some people wonder, I have been practicing for 3 years, so why haven't I attained any enlightenment? You may claim you have practiced for 3 years, but have you ever considered how many hours you have actually dedicated to practicing Dharma during those 3 years? It is unlikely you have devoted all your time to Dharma practice without eating, drinking, or sleeping. Therefore, it is possible that you have spent a maximum of 1 month in 3 years on Dharma. Even if you have dedicated an entire month to practicing Dharma, it is hard to determine whether you have practiced effectively. For example, every morning you get up and practice impermanence for half an hour, but have you really abided in the corresponding state during the meditation? Some people spend the first 15 minutes feeling drowsy, then perform a bit of analytical meditation, and later start mind-wandering. In such cases, although they claim they've practiced for half an hour, the duration that truly counts as practice might be fewer than 10 minutes. By doing so, how can they even expect to attain enlightenment? Spiritual practice cannot be approached with laziness or slackness. Otherwise, we will easily get exhausted from studying and practicing Dharma. The Sutra on the Mahayana practice of the 6 perfections says, an idle person is like a wooden pestle that has 2 characteristics. First, it's unable to activate itself, and it wears down when used. Second, it cannot stand on its own, so once placed on the ground, it simply falls and gradually becomes worn out until it can only be burned by fire. If a person slacks off, they lack the motivation to practice Dharma, and at the same time, they are unable to practice independently. The biggest obstacle to our practice is laziness, which prevents us from practicing diligently. Not practicing diligently reveals our lack of belief in impermanence, leading to oversleeping. Thus, we may inevitably sleep late into the morning. Past eminent masters were not like this. Motivated by their conviction in impermanence, they were always driven to practice diligently. As a result, they refrained from excessive sleep at night and remained undistracted throughout the day, rendering themselves immune to meaningless pursuits. Compared to earlier times, many people are making great progress in the practice of impermanence. They used to live deluded lives and fritter away their time on indulgences, feeling no remorse after spending decades in this way. Now, although they sometimes still get distracted, they feel ashamed after idling, saying, "Alas, I didn't practice well all day today." I'm really a bad person. Some may even start to pull their hair, pinch, or punch themselves as a form of punishment, which can be an effective way to motivate themselves to practice Dharma. We should strengthen our mental resolve while practicing Dharma. Many eminent masters have inspiring life stories in this regard. If your practice on impermanence is not well established, it'll be difficult for you to make good progress in other practices. So even if you cannot fully emulate past eminent masters who devoted all their time to practice, at least you should start behaving differently from how you did in the past and avoid slacking off. Otherwise, you cannot succeed in either mundane or transcendental matters. With a solid practice on impermanence, you will naturally develop a drive for practice. In fact, as you progress on the path, there comes a point where you should begin practicing voluntarily rather than out of obligation. It shouldn't be because of pressure from your teacher or tutor that you start to practice. Without their prompting, you may not practice on your own. It will be hard for you to make progress if you are like this. For instance, if a child is not interested in learning and is forced to do homework solely out of fear of punishment from their parents and teachers, when the adults are not around, they will instead choose to play outside or watch TV rather than study. Similarly, we ordinary people are like that child. Without the guidance of a qualified teacher, we will remain idle and lazy every day. Therefore, we must pray to the Guru and the three jewels for the conviction of impermanence to truly arise within us. Then we will not dare to slack off in our practice. We should understand the teaching above and then put it into real practice.